Welcome to the Trail Chasers podcast. I'm your host, Dean Horwitz, and I'm excited to share this journey with you. Each week, we'll be hitting the trails with some of South Africa's most inspiring trail runners, diving into the topics that matter most and uncovering the secrets of this incredible sport. Lace up your trail shoes and join me on this adventure. New episodes every week. How's it, Brendan? Welcome to the Trail Chasers. Let's dive right in. In a nutshell, tell me, who is Brendan Lombard?
Sure. Difficult question. I've never had to answer that before. Who's Brendan? I'm a husband to a lovely wife, an athlete, and a coach. I like to say I'm a sports scientist as well because I love diving deeper into certain things and nuances around the sport. Love running, huge passion of mine, have been running since I was a little boy. I won't say I'm defined by running. I'd rather say that running is merely just a part of my makeup. But yeah, first and foremost, husband, athlete, entrepreneur, pretty much me.
How do you balance it between, I guess, the running and the coaching?
Look, I think it's quite easy because running is a passion and coaching is a passion, so they coexist quite well together. I find that running shouldn't steal away from your life, but rather add to it. But to make the two coexist, it's easy for me. I love it. I love working with people. I love helping people. I like it when an athlete comes to me with a scary goal and just says, this is what I want to do. Do you think it's possible? Look, of course, within reason, I'd say yes, it is possible. It might take us a year, maybe 2 years to get there. But I like it when people decide to pursue these big, scary goals, because ultimately it's when we do this that we find out exactly who we are and what we're made of.
Yeah. And taking it back a bit, when did that kind of transition happen from like athlete to like athlete coach? Was there a specific moment or was it just like a gradual shift?
Yeah, look, just a brief bit of history. I've been involved in the endurance space for pretty much my entire life. An elite triathlete to then transitioning only into the running side. But I was at university when it actually happened. I was studying my first year of sports science, and an athlete approached me and said, listen, would you be keen to coach me? And I took it on, and that was my first coaching gig, if you want to call it that. Completed my degree, and then went on to specializing in strength and conditioning in the gym and sort of personal training, if you want to call it that. And then along that process, I thought to myself, hey, you know what? Running is really a big passion and the space is growing. The sport is growing, especially trail running. So I thought, let me see if I can help athletes. And I started something called Runners Creed Academy, which was a good few years ago. And that was my first dive into the remote coaching base. And that went pretty well. I used it more as a passion project at the time, alongside everything else I was doing. And yeah, recently, about a year ago, just over a year prior to moving to the UK, my very good friend and one of my coaches, Aaron Van Asen from Flat Rock, said to me, listen, why don't we merge? And I come under the Flat Rock umbrella, bring all my athletes along, and then we take it from there. And we did that, and it's been absolutely epic. It's grown. I really love my athletes in the camp I've got, and I especially love what Flat Rock stands for. We always put the health of our athletes first. And it's just gone from strength to strength from there to a point now where I'm in a position where I can focus on coaching and have adventure alongside that, because what it allows is for me to pursue my goals, but also help others along the way.
Yeah. And coaching in general, has it always been, since you've been involved, has it always been like a remote kind of practice, or was there a time that it was a bit more like one-on-one kind of focused in terms of obviously the running?
Yeah, look, when I was in Cape Town still, I used to do one-on-one coaching in terms of strength inside the gym. I think it's important to realize where the coaching space is going in terms of the use of technology now, and also how we can leverage technology to help running and strength and conditioning fit into people's busy lifestyles. But yes, going back to when I was an athlete, we had a lot of one-on-one coaching or coaching in a squad setting where we would be on the track, smashing sessions. That still happens a lot today in terms of when people are doing the quality sessions and stuff like that. But I think the use of technology nowadays is great. It definitely helps us to expand our reach, and help athletes all over the globe. But we have to be careful because it still gives the opportunity to arise that people can get neglected and you are not in constant comms. And that's where I think it's the coach's responsibility to make sure that there are constant check-ins. We are following up with our athletes, making sure that we know how they feel on a subjective level. It's very easy for us as coaches to go and look at data. and we can make deductions by looking at data, your heart rates, paces, where you've run, all of that kind of stuff. But me personally, I value subjective feedback from my athletes highly. You are so much more than the data we see. So I really enjoy talking to my athletes, finding out how they felt, things like that. And that I feel helps bridge the gap from when, call it old school, I don't want to say old school, but the days of where we were constantly seeing athletes every day in person to where now we are. So I think that subjective feedback is absolutely crucial.
How do you work with athletes all around the world, different time zones, different weather conditions, like all of those kind of factors that are so different to each other, but also obviously to what you're experiencing?
Yeah, look, again, this is where communication is important, right? And I do coach athletes on a global scale. I've got athletes all over the world that I work with. And I just think where the communication is made easier, that relationship fosters better. Athletes are all aware where I live, what the time difference is. And they know exactly if they message me, they will get a response as soon as I can possibly do it, which is usually pretty much within a few hours at most, or if something is urgent, it's straight away. And all my athletes know that if something is urgent and they require urgent feedback, all they've got to do is let me know that it's urgent. But in terms of I've got an athlete in Hong Kong, and the time difference is quite vast compared to where I am. But we've established a communication medium where we both understand the difference, and he knows if he messages me on a Sunday, I'm only going to get to it probably on my Sunday night, which is his Monday morning. But we'll just time those, or time that comms effectively.
And let's start like in the kind of bigger picture. When someone comes to you and they want to be coached, how does that kind of initial process happen from your side?
Yeah, look, this is where I call it the discovery process is absolutely key. Having that initial call, having a chat, figuring out what an athlete's training age and history is. Training age meaning how long has the athlete been in the sport, and the training history looking at what have they done from a training perspective over the last months, years, or whatever it may be. From there, you can gauge where the athlete's at. And I always say running doesn't have to be complicated. And I'd like to, whenever I chat to someone, I say, I compare it to building a house, right? So you got to have that initial foundation first, okay, which is more often than not our base phase of training. Then we put the walls up, which is the specificity of training. So you're looking at things like speed, heel work, strength, etc. And then we put the roof on the house, which is when an athlete peaks and we go through a taper phase. And that's how I try to break it down for them. Now, when I break that down, I also explain that so your journey is going to be completely different to John's journey. No training program is going to be the same. And I think also a big thing where remote coaching has made leaps and bounds is that we are eliminating sort of that space where comparison happens, where you've got everybody doing the same plan and we've got athletes comparing themselves to one another. How fast did you do that? How many Ks did you get on your hour run? Things like that. So by making the plan highly personal to the athlete, we make sure that they hit their goals, not anybody else's. And I think that's super important. Again, and I'll just dive into this quickly. I think I saw a post the other day on Facebook where someone was looking for a coach, and someone recommended just to download an online plan. And I can't stress enough how incorrect that is. Your needs as an athlete are so individual that following an online plan is not going to do the trick medium to long term. Short term, you might see some gains, but long term, for longevity and the goals that you want to hit, you need individualization of training.
And, before we go back into that, why would you say that like everyone should get a coach, even if you're just starting out running, or if you're in that, obviously there's a big thing where it's, no, I don't need a coach yet. So why would you argue with that in terms of you should have a coach like immediately?
Yeah, look, first of all, having a coach is for everybody. It doesn't matter if you are running your first 5K park run or if you're running 100 miles at UTMB. Everybody, in my opinion, can and should have a coach. For the biggest reason is that a lot of the time, us coaches, we actually protect the athlete from hurting themselves. There is a science to coaching and there's a science to running. Look, don't get me wrong. You can head out on the road and you can just run every day, sure. And you'll see progress initially. But eventually, that linear curve is going to plateau and it's just going to stay there. And you're either going to stagnate or you're going to regress because you pick up an injury from just constantly loading. There is a science to this called periodization of training. And there's various models of periodization coaches use to make sure that the athlete is number one protected and number one progressing.
Mm.
That is why I say an online plan, cool, go do it. But what you actually need is something specific to you, periodized specific for you, in order to ensure progress and, of course, to eliminate regression and injury.
Mm. And do you take on athletes like across the board, or do you specify a kind of certain level before you start working with them?
No, I think I'm open to coaching anyone on any terrain. I always say trail, tar, or track, whatever it is, I'll coach you. However, that initial meeting is really important. We have to make sure that the relationship is going to work. Just as important as a marriage is, a relationship between coach and athlete is super important. You must remember as well, as coaches, we're not merely instructing. To me, a bad coach is someone that just instructs. A coach is there to yes, prescribe sessions, but also act as a mentor and, most importantly, teach. We're here to empower athletes. We want them to learn so that they can make decisions within their journey that benefits them the most.
When it comes to athletes, do you mostly get athletes that come to you and say, I want to start running? Or is it kind of people coming with goals and being like, I want to get to this goal, get me there?
Yeah, look, a bit of both, really. Do you get athletes who are like, I just want to start running and see how it goes, and then maybe choose a race down the line. Then we get athletes that are also like, you know what, I have a goal of doing UTCT 100 or UTCT 100 miles. And a lot of the time, we also have to manage expectations. For example, if someone who comes to me and says, I've done the furthest race I've done is 10 kilometers. In 6 months' time, I want to do UTCT 100. More than likely, I'm going to say, listen, it's probably not the best idea. Things take time. That's why it's called an endurance sport, right? You got to take. It takes time to build up to a certain level of capability in order to do these hard things. And by no means am I doubting an athlete's mental capacity and mental strength to do that. It's more, like I said, we're protecting the athlete from actually hurting themselves. Take it from someone who's had a myriad of injuries. I've had every injury under the sun, and a lot of the time, it was due to my own stubbornness, where I thought I was unbreakable. And I learned the hard way. I've made the mistakes which I will not allow my athletes to make. And I think it's important to admit where I've made mistakes as well. I've had some big injuries and they've sidelined me for months. Even if you look at this year, for example, I've been out for almost the whole year. Okay, sure, that was due to a myriad of other factors, but I've made the mistakes and I know exactly what will happen to someone if they don't remedy what they're doing incorrectly. And luckily, from a coach's perspective, I can pick that up now through experience. I can say, Dean, perhaps take it easy because you've got a really stressful work week right now. There's no need to empty that cup. So and also when we look at an athlete is so much more than just physical training. A lot of the time we say, your training is running. This is what I'm going to do. But it's not. Your training comprises of, yes, the physical act of running, but also comprises of how you manage your recovery, how much sleep you get, your nutrition, are you foam rolling, are you meditating? It all comes together holistically. And if we are not covering all those bases as best as possible, sure, you're not going to hit the markers every day. But if you're not covering them as best as possible, long term, you're going to ask for trouble.
How do you ensure that, like, I could be doing your program 100% perfectly, but I'm not winning, but it's obviously not due to your coaching. So where do you come in over there and advise on that?
Well, again, this is where the communication is key, number one, and that subjective feedback from athlete to coach is important. But I also think that there needs to be a level of accountability on the athlete's part. So, yes, we can prescribe programs and the athlete can come to us and say, listen, coach, I did everything you asked of me last week, but I'm feeling super flat and I'm feeling super fatigued and I haven't been sleeping much. Then I can pick up those cues and say, okay, maybe we need to pull back a little bit from the training until we fixed your sleep so that you're able to give your training the best effort that you can. Now, in terms, a lot of the time, yes, a coach's job is accountability. We hold athletes accountability and there are check-ins. And for one, every Monday of every week, I provide video feedback to my athletes to make sure that they know exactly what I see on my side. But more so than that, and something I think is important, is the athlete does need to also hold them or take some accountability for parts of their program. I can't be in your kitchen every night to help you cook. I can't tell you to go to bed every night and not watch another episode or whatever you're watching. I can't take the foam roller out of your cupboard and say it's time to foam roll. These are all parts of the athlete's journey that they need to take accountability for. And I mean, jumping on that, a lot of time athletes will say, I'm so unlucky. I'm unlucky because I got injured, or I'm unlucky because I didn't hit that marker, or whatever it may be. But have you asked yourself as the athlete first, did you cover all bases? Did you listen to your coach when they said to you, hey, you got to foam roll, you got to get in enough sleep, you got to feed your body correctly? You can hit all the markers in training, but if you're not hitting the markers on all the sort of subsidiary things, you are going to make your life a lot more difficult. And as coaches, like I said, I can't be in your kitchen every night and tell you to cook the meals. So, yeah, that's where I think that part's on the athlete. But as coaches, it's our job to take in cues and listen, but then also provide feedback on what we see on the training side of things.
Do you find that most of your athletes are in that kind of space in terms of accountability? And how do you deal with, I guess, ones that just aren't? They just want to see results, but they're not willing to do the work.
Yeah, I must say, I've been blessed with a great camp of athletes. Everybody, they gel well with me. Everybody knows how I work. They understand how I work. And for the most part, they do understand what is required of them in terms of, like I said, the subsidiary things, the recovery, the sleep, the nutrition. I can only educate. And after I've educated, it's up to the athletes, again, to take that or take stock of what I've said and implement it. But yes, with my athletes, I feel like they have. I'm pretty good with communication as well. And like I said, it's a balance, right? There are times where, for example, I've got 20 messages on my WhatsApp and I might be only getting to an athlete 2 hours after they message me, which I still don't think is too bad. But
No.
In terms of feedback and listening, with my athletes, I'm always open to taking on calls as and when needed. So if an athlete feels as though they need to have a chat with me, we make time and we have a chat. And like I said previously, a coach's job is not just instructing. We have to listen, take on cues, provide advice, educate, sometimes even be borderline a psychologist or part of the job. We have to be good listeners. So yeah, a coach is not just someone that just says, here's a program, go and do.
And talk a bit more about that multifaceted level in terms of having the kind of athlete background, having the sports science background, and what does it mean if a coach kind of only has one of them, has only been an athlete but doesn't really have the science behind them, or is really only has the science background but's never been like a trail runner?
Yeah, look, I might get lambasted for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe that a great coach in running has been a runner and understands running. You do need the theoretical knowledge as well. I think it's very dangerous if we have someone coaching that doesn't understand the physiological adaptations that happen in a human being's body when a stimulus is applied. I think it's dangerous if a coach doesn't know the science of periodization correctly. You can have all the practical experience in the world. You can have been, maybe you're an elite athlete, maybe you've been running for 20 years, and now you decide to coach, or decide to be a coach. Now the thing is, and this is where the danger is that you're coaching from your own subjective experience of what running was to you. Now that's fine, and yes, that is valuable. However, your experience is not going to be the same as the athlete you take on. And this is where the theoretical part is so important. Knowing the sciences of running, the sciences of how the human body works physiologically, and applying methods and mechanisms correctly. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think that, again, I might get lambasted for saying this, but all running coaches should be almost governed by a body and checked that, number one, they got the necessary qualifications, and sure, that they have got the necessary experience as well, because people are getting hurt. It's dangerous. No, look, I mean, if you're coaching solely from your subjective experience, chances are that you're going to only apply your knowledge of what you've done previously to your current athletes. Super important to zoom out and take yourself out of the picture. Look at what the science is, discover where the athlete is at, and then apply. So that's my take. I think these days it's too easy to just be a running coach. I think it requires so much more than just your own experience of running to be a good coach.
And What about the terrains and the different types of running? Do you feel that if you're a road running coach, it's just adding a little bit here and there to an athlete who's I want to do trail running, or is it again like a very much you need the experience in that kind of space?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because at the end of the day, both sports are running. However, they
Yeah.
are so different on so many levels.
Mm.
And the way that we train for road versus trail is also very different. So while the basics remain the same, there are nuances between the two that you have to consider. For example, a road or someone training for a road marathon is not going to be trying to get 3,000, 4,000 meters of vertical gain every week, whereas a trail runner will. Trail is so much more technical than road. All these things you've got to take into consideration, even the nutrition protocols. So while the basic act of running is there, the way that we coach and I say the two different sports because they are different, is very different. This is actually quite exciting though, right? And it's exciting because we haven't yet seen the raw speed of road running on an elite or global level be transferred yet onto the world stage in trail. And we've had a taste of it on the Golden Trail Series. We've seen the East African runners come into the Golden Trail Series and absolutely crush things, right? Doing fantastically. What I would like to see, and what I still believe is unexplored, is seeing our East African road runners come into the ultra trail space in events like CCC, MB, but have been coached and trained correctly for the sport. That to me is still an untapped category of the sport and would be really cool to see. Do I think it's going to happen soon? Probably not. I think we need to realize that East Africans and the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, they run for their lives. It's their first source of income, right? And I don't want to say we run for money because we don't, but these people run for their lives and their source of income is much bigger in the road space than what it would be in the trail running space. So until we can bridge that gap, I don't think we'll see it anytime soon. But it is exciting to know that we have got these insanely gifted African athletes that, if given the opportunity to be coached correctly, trained correctly, and enter to that ultra trail part of the sport, I think we're going to see some pretty epic things.
Yeah, no, that I 100% agree with that in terms of the commercial side of it. So even in South Africa, as soon as we get to that level, I think that will be a complete game changer. And in terms of the skills, are they transferable between road and trail? If someone is on a kind of road specific plan, would you only have them on the road? And obviously with the trail, would you only have them on the trails?
No, so look, the way I coach includes a bit of both. Road running has a part of it that can highly benefit trail runners. If you look at mechanisms like leg turnover, developing speed is a lot easier to develop on uninterrupted flat surfaces like the track or roads than what it is on trail. So a lot of my speed training, or speed work rather, is given to my athletes on the road or on something like the track. And it's also a little bit better to monitor in terms of data on my side, or in terms of paces that need to be hit, RPE or heart rate values, things like that, because you got that constant sort of flat terrain. When we are on trail, the terrain is ever changing. So the variables like heart rate and speed and effort is going to be all over the show all the time. So in terms of developing speed, I ask my athletes to do it on the road. Climbing, things like that, naturally we climb on the terrain that we're going to race on, which would be for trail runners on the trail or the mountains. But then everything else, I would say, is pretty much done on trail. However, I prescribe it maybe an easy run on flat trail. Or I might say, okay, you've got a long run. Let's make it a race simulation. Let's look at what the race is. If you can get on the route, great, we recce the route. If not, we simulate it as best as possible. So you head out, you're going to do 2 hours. In your race, the first 2 hours of an ultra has 2,000 meters of vert with 2 significant climbs. So we've got to mimic that as best as we can. Just like that. Like I said, there's so many ways of coaching and so many ways of providing a stimulus to an athlete in trail running that is a lot more broader than road running. Road running is quite measured and quite controlled. When I say controlled, if you look at a gold label marathon, things like the New York Marathon, London Marathon, they are all kept within a certain perimeter of how much vertical gain they're allowed. And they've got these parameters they have to work within. So it's quite measurable. We know that it's going to be flat. We know that it's going to be fast. And when coaching that, we don't have to take into account too many things. Whereas with trail running, the route that you're training for could have 3 significant climbs. One's 500 meters, one's 1,000. Your race could be 53 or 55 Ks, whereas a gold label marathon will be 42.2 on the dot. So again, this shows how different the sports are, right? But in terms of your original question of can road running transfer into trails, absolutely. That speed you can develop on the road or the track will most definitely transfer onto the trails. And we see this in a lot of especially our South African elites as of recent. We are seeing that in the beginning of the year, they're all doing a roadblock. You ask yourself why, right? It's to develop that speed, get ready for the upcoming season, especially the Euro season, which which happens different to the South African season. They do these roadblocks, they develop that raw speed, and then they go into trail-specific training after that, knowing that they've got the engine already developed. If that makes sense.
No, 100%. And in terms of using the road as like a break from the trails, like an off season, and then going further in that, what is your kind of advice on taking breaks and things like that, and how do you structure that into your programs? Obviously, in terms of short term, like on a weekly basis, but also obviously like monthly, 3 monthly, 6 monthly type of thing.
Yeah. So first of all, I say that rest is training. And I think it's important for the athlete to know that when you're resting, you're actually getting better. And rest is a key component. So, how do we implement rest? So first of all, on a weekly basis, if we look at something which we call a microcycle. A microcycle is basically a week of training. And within that microcycle, I might earmark key areas where a recovery run is needed, or an easier run rather, or a complete rest day. Or maybe an active rest day where you could go out kayaking, or you could go play touch rugby with the mates, or do an easy cycle, something like that. That all depends on the load pattern that's being implemented from a periodization point of view, and of course, listening to an athlete's subjective feedback. Now, when we look at a monthly pattern, like I said, in periodization of training, there's various different models we use, from step loading paradigms to linear loading paradigms, etc. I could go on forever about this, and each loading paradigm suits a different athlete better, if I could say that. But typically, as an example, a typical loading pattern could be a mesocycle. Now, a mesocycle is made up of 3 or 4 weeks. Now, within any given mesocycle, we could load an athlete for 3 weeks incrementally, where we manipulate certain variables such as load, intensity, duration, frequency, things like that. And then after a 3-week loading phase of incremental increases, we pull them back in the 4th week. And we say, okay, now it's time for your body to take a step back, rest, recover, absorb the training load, and adapt. And when you adapt is ultimately when you come back fitter, faster, stronger, etc. Now, it's also important to note that there's a phenomenon called supercompensation. Okay, now supercompensation happens in between days that an athlete's training. So every athlete has a baseline fitness, right? Now, when an athlete trains or implements a stimulus such as a track session or running session, that fitness actually decreases below baseline. Now, during that recovery phase, and when you're resting, your fitness creeps back up to baseline and ultimately past baseline, where supercompensation happens, which basically says, okay, the body is saying, I'm absorbing this stimulus, I'm going to come back more callous, more fitter, faster, stronger, things like that. Or, for lack of a better word, get used to what I'm doing. Does that make sense? Moving on to rest on a long-term basis. This is super important for every athlete. You must remember that training, racing, running is a stressful thing. Now, I don't mean stress as in like your typical workday stress. It's stress on the body. And we are not unbreakable. I've learned personally that stress can really hinder performance. And it's important to have breaks from running, or rather not following any certain structure for a few weeks or a month or so, and just letting your hair down, just breathing, being like, I don't want to think about it. if I feel like running, I'm going to go for a run. Or if I want to take a few weeks off, I'm going to take a few weeks off. And this is where psychology, particularly amongst elite athletes who are so type A and who are hell-bent on performance and making sure that they're going to be ready for the next race. This is where the psychology between coach and athlete comes into play, where we got to say to them, you know what, taking a month off is probably going to do you better than us jumping straight in, killing the body, or sorry, that's a bad word, working the body hard, and then your body's not getting any time to just relax, regenerate, and make sure that it's ready for the next season. If you're just going to continue bashing away, you are going to get tired. You're going to, there's that old phrase, right? It says, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but I think it ends in saying, never outrun your joy of running. So what that's telling us is we do need to have these periods that you've got to just take some time out. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be your best all the time. And you never are going to be your best all the time. This sport is not a linear sport. It's going to have peaks and troughs. You're never going to perform at every single race you do. And that's why I say it's important to take your ego away from what you believe the outcome should be. Rest, absolutely key. Downtime, key. De-stressing, absolutely key. Your body is a very sensitive micro ecosystem, and it does need periods of downtime.
Yeah. Would you still work with an athlete during that downtime, or is it okay, let's take a month's break from coaching and pick it up again in a month's time?
No, look, there's scope for both, right? Some athletes prefer to not have any structure and will say, I don't want to look at anything. I just want some downtime and I'm going to rest or whatever. Fine. But there's also the athlete that prefers to have that guidance during a rest phase. Now, you might think to yourself, I'm resting. What guidance do I need?
Exactly.
There is guidance needed, because you might say to an athlete, go and take it easy, rest, run when you feel like it. But that athlete's run when you feel like it might mean 4 or 5 times a week. Yeah, where I've told you to take some downtime. So a coach's job again is to be in there and say, listen, stop, let's pull it back. You're not going to lose fitness. You're going to be okay. You're going to come back stronger, etc. So again, we fall part of that process of stopping the athlete from doing damage. A coach is not just someone that writes programs. A coach is, like I said, your mentor, your educator, a very good friend, because I can guarantee you that a lot of coaches speak to the athletes more times than what those athletes may speak to their best friends. So you're a friend. It's a relationship. Yeah, coaching is not just assigning programs, but it's also guiding, right?
Yeah. And how do you manage people's kind of expectations, but also how much of your job is, and do you see your job being that management of expectations, that kind of like putting the handbrake on when you see athletes going too hard or too far?
Yeah, I think a big part of our job is managing expectations. Human beings, naturally, we're all dreamers, especially endurance athletes. More often than not, we are the kind of people that have these goals that are full of grandeur, and they are big and they seem like unachievable almost. And a lot of the time, I've had athletes come who do have goals that are huge and scare me as a coach. And I'm going to be like, right, you know what? Let's just, like you said, pull the handbrake up here. Let's talk about this. And let me tell you why I don't think it's a good idea right now.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky that all the athletes that have had these huge goals, and I've spoken to them about it, they've taken my advice on board, and they're probably like, yeah, probably the best idea is not to go for that. And I'd rather say something, why don't we zoom out, choose a goal that's maybe a little bit lesser in overall volume or overall difficulty, and let's tick off that first before we decide to go for something big. And a lot of the time, we'll tick off that first goal, and they'll be like, you know what, coach, that was really hard. I don't know how I would have gotten through what we originally planned. So, yes, it is our job to manage expectations. And I also think it's our job to tell athletes that progression in the sport usually happens. And I think it's due to, my opinion again, is due to the overload of information we have now, and Instagram and social media, and it looks cool to go for 100Ks or run 100 miles. And naturally, progression looks like, okay, I've done 50K. Now I have to do 100K.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's not the way this works. Yes, if there's enough time and we can build you up to that 100K, sure. But why don't we look at, you've just done a 50K, why don't we look at doing another 50K, but mastering it, or making sure that we do it a little bit quicker, or making sure that when you finish your next 50K, you don't feel absolutely trashed. Then we can talk about a 50 mile or 100K. And also, everybody's goals are individual and different, right? The guy doing a 16K trail or a 20K trail is just as damn good and epic as the guy running the 100K trail, right? So we got to look at, I'm super, super impressed by these guys that are doing 20K trails in what, like an hour and a half, an hour, 40 minutes?
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
There's no ways I can do that. But I can run a 100K, but I can't run a 20K as fast as that. To me, that 20K is super quick, super impressive, and super awesome.
Yeah.
Okay? Again, we need to take away this whole stigma around the sport that you're only an ultra runner if you run a 100K ultra trail. No, it's not the way it works. But it's just as impressive to watch someone smash a 20K that is a 100K. We look at the track, right? Those guys running a 5,000 meter at the Olympic Games in under 13 minutes, to me, that is like mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's context in goals. And I think that the athletes doing shorter races are just as epic as the guys doing their 100 and 100 miles.
Yeah. And what is obviously, besides from the obvious, but what is the kind of difference between training for 100 miles versus a 20K? Are there kind of similarities, or it's two, as you said, with road and trail, it's two totally different disciplines?
There definitely are similarities. Look, the big obvious difference is overall volume. The guy training for a 20K race doesn't have to be doing 10, 15-hour weeks. You're still running on the same terrain, which is trail. One guy's just doing it a hell of a lot faster than the other guy, and you may have to develop certain energy systems in the 20K athlete a little bit differently to what we are developing in the 100 miler, because they will be using different substrates to provide that energy. Speaking of how the energy is provided, a guy doing a 20K is largely going to be relying purely on carbohydrate and carbohydrate oxidation to provide that energy, to be operating at that sort of aerobic threshold, anaerobic space. The guy doing the 100 miler, yes, there will be a space for carbohydrate usage, but there'll also be exercise physiology tells us that when we start doing exercise that's longer than 2 hours at a really low intensity, we start dipping into fat oxidation and fats as a fuel. So I believe personally, someone like myself, and this is a personal thing, I would be using both carbohydrates and fats, so I would make use of both substrates in an ultra. But the guy doing the 10, 20K race is pretty much solely relying on carbohydrate stores to oxidize and give them that energy. So in terms of the training, that's the nutrition side. But in terms of the training, obviously overall volume, the 100 mile is going to be a hell of a lot more volume versus the 20K runner, and the sessions may look different. The 20K athlete needs a hell of a lot more speed, shorter intervals at higher thresholds, whereas the 100 miler is going to be doing intervals that are a bit longer in nature at lower thresholds to develop that sort of speed endurance space. So yes, while the terrain is the same, the training is quite different in certain aspects, yes.
And is there like a time frame in terms of going, saying, okay, I want to start doing trail run, I want to do 100 mile eventually? Is there like a timeline on that, or is it very specific to an athlete?
Very specific to an athlete. I think 100 miles is a long way. I've been in the sport for well over, let's just say a long time, and I haven't done 100 mile yet.
Yeah.
I've run 100K, I've run over 100Ks, but I haven't done 100 mile yet. I do still have that curiosity, and I will still run 100 miles. I just don't feel ready. I think an athlete's timeline is personal. An athlete will always know when they're ready. As coaches, we can only guide at the end of the day. The athlete is still going to do what they want to do, with or without us. So we can guide as best as possible. But in terms of your question and timeline, there is, in my opinion, no timeline, except initially. And what I mean by that is, like I said before, someone has just only done a 10K race, now they want to do 100 miles. I'm going to be like, listen, your timeline is not ready for now. You need to wait a good few years before you take on 100 miles. So, because you must remember that these super long races that athletes do is traumatic. And what do I mean by traumatic? Traumatic in the sense that our body does not enjoy being put under that stress and damage for that long. The only thing that really enjoys it is our crazy minds, to be honest. But the body doesn't enjoy it. And after you've done something so long and so damaging, the body needs to recover. And that recovery process can be really long. And what I've learned personally as well is that the stress of racing takes a long time to recover from. I've made the mistake. I think it was 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly. But myself and my wife went to Switzerland for 2 months to prepare for UTMB week and things like that. And I was doing really excessive volume, time in big mountains every day. I think my weekly vert was like 10,000 meters of gain. And ultimately what happened is I had trained and worked my body so hard for CCC that when I got to the start line, I was absolutely shattered. And I had nothing to give. And post CCC, my body was still in flight mode. And I decided to race Maxi race when I got back to South Africa, which was also not the best idea. Great race, just I should not have done it. And it's taken me now months, almost a year, to recover from that stress, from that load. Because you get something called cumulative fatigue. And my cumulative fatigue was so high that I failed to recognize that my body had just had enough. It was done. And that's why I say I've made these mistakes and I'll stop my athletes from making them because I know what happens, right? You need to recover from a hard season. You need to recover from intense training. Your body is not unbreakable. Yeah, I think that's important to take stock of.
Yeah. And when you look back at your journey, what were some of the highs and lows, or what have been some of the highs and lows so far?
Sure. I think the biggest high for me was, I think there's two of them. And I know it's cliche to say, and we always bring it back to a race, but this really was a high for me because I had gone through having surgery on my knee to repair meniscus. And at that stage, I thought, my running's done. And I had a great doctor who did a really great job, and I happened to actually recover quite quickly. And I decided to race UTCT 65K when it was still around a few years ago. And I remember at that stage, my good friend Cody Reed was in the lineup, and we had some really great runners, and I had the race of my life. And I think I had run the fastest time ever by a South African on that course. Ended up second behind Cody, and it was just such a high for me because of knowing where I'd come from and what I had to endure in my personal life as well at the stage. So that was quite a big high for me. And then I think the other high would be spending time in Europe with my now wife. There is an amazing world out there. And I think experiencing it on 2 feet with someone you love and in this amazing place is the best way to experience life, right? We get to see things most people will never see. And it's like what I say about Cape Townians as well. Most Cape Townians do not know what is on their doorstep.
Yeah.
Get outside there, get into the mountains. It is absolutely epic. Cape Town to me is the best city in the world. So get outside, experience life. Don't just live don't just exist. Get out there and live. Yeah, lows. Sure. I think this past year has been quite a low for me personally. We moved to the UK, which hasn't been easy at all. It's very different to back home. And there was obviously the stress of the move and the stress of building an income here and things like that. And I tried to train as hard as I could to race on or in certain races through all that stress. And ultimately, it broke me completely down. I've had issues with my body now for the entire year. I had a high volume injection into my Achilles just about a month or 2 ago to sort out that issue. And only now am I really on the mend. But I was in a really dark place mentally. I think my wife would agree that I was almost clinically depressed because I had let running become who I am. And when I wasn't able to do it properly, I just like succumbed into a bit of a hole. But I'm out of that hole now and I'm on the mend, and 2025 is going to be absolutely epic. That's all I can say. There's some big plans, but again, the biggest lesson and takeaway I've learned is that running does not define me, but it's rather just a makeup or a small part of my makeup as a human being.
Yeah. And you obviously dealt with quite a few DNFs. How do you deal with those in the moment to make that call? And then like immediately afterwards as well. And obviously going forward, how do you deal with that mentally and physically?
Yeah, look, nobody wants to have a DNF. I can almost guarantee that it's going to happen to every athlete at some point. You have to accept that your body is not going to show up for you every day. Yeah, dealing with DNFs is not easy. And then just learning how to run, you got to learn how to deal with the mental side of the sport and those DNFs. I think the way that I dealt with DNFs are that, like I said previously and so many times throughout this chat, is I learned to take or separate my ego from outcome. And that race doesn't necessarily define my whole career, and that I am so much more than that race and my running. My running is, like I said, it doesn't define me. So I think also after the DNF, sit with the DNF, process it, think about it, learn from it, be like, I did make this mistake, or maybe I didn't do this to the best of my ability. And that's okay. We're only human, right? You're going to make mistakes. But I think accepting it as a lesson rather than a failure is the most important. From a physical side, after a DNF, I think it's important to accept that your body's telling you, I need some time out. I need to take it easy. And you got to listen to your body's cues. Your body will send you cues telling you, listen, I've had enough. I need some time out. And you got to listen, because if you don't, again, coming from someone with experience with this, if you do not listen, you're going to go into a deep, dark place.
And what advice would you give to someone if you are in those kind of moments during a race and you're not really sure if you should DNF? What are the sort of pros and cons, and how do you process that in the kind of moment when it's like either it's I just want to give up, or it's I'm pushing ahead no matter what?
Yeah, again, I think pulling out of a race where your health is at risk or you're at risk of hurting yourself is a very mature decision. And I think an important decision to make. Whereas, two different sides of it, right? Like you got the risk side where you can do damage. And then you got the side of, okay, maybe I'm having a bit of a gut bomb. Can I come back from this? Maybe. Or am I just really pooped and going through a bad patch and, having a bit of a death march? So there's those sides, right? I think there are ways of coming back from having a really bad race. So, and I've been there. I've been in spaces where I'm just like, I don't know if I can make another 10K. And then I'll say to myself, okay, but listen, you got an aid station coming up. Let's just make it to that aid station. Get to the aid station, sit down for a few minutes, gather yourself, stand up. And I've gotten going again, and my legs came back to life. And it's cool. That was the right decision. So I think taking it from aid station to aid station, then making decisions is important. But if you are at risk of doing damage and you've fallen and you've hurt something and you're running through that now, you're going to hurt yourself even more. So I rather take a race out in 1 week than 6 or 7 weeks out.
Yeah.
So I think it's contextual to a degree. And again, this is a personal thing for the athlete. You got to be able to have the maturity to pull out when you know you should, because it's dangerous to keep going. And the maturity, or rather the grit, to be like, listen, this is just a bad patch. I'm going to feel better later. Let's keep going.
Yeah. And we can use myself as a kind of personal example. How do you deal with an athlete that kind of goes through, like I did, with a kind of a sickness, bronchitis, in the kind of middle of a kind of training block, and they've got a race, they're committed to that race? How do you adjust, obviously knowing that time is not on your side and you can't force train in the kind of last few weeks?
Yeah, so again, your health is your number one asset, right? and there are inherent risks to training through illness. So like in your case, I said to you, let's pull back, just take it easy, recover, and then we can ease back into it. You don't want to just dive straight back into hard quality training and stressing the body on top of just coming out of illness that you potentially get ill again, or you harm your body physiologically. And I always say, rather go into a race a little bit undertrained than overtrained or ill, right?
Yeah.
You should never run a race when you're ill, but rather go into a race undertrained than overtrained or fatigued. And jumping into hard training post-illness or even 2 weeks post-illness, like something that's too difficult, is playing with fire, and you're going to stress your body even more than what it should be and have you less prepared for the race. In terms of if we just got foot off the pedal and said, cool, let's ease back into it, maybe do 1 or 2 hard sessions here and there just to get the engine firing. Yes, you're not going to be in the shape we wanted, but you're still going to be in decent enough shape to have a good race, because all the training you did prior to getting ill isn't wasted. It's still there.
Yeah. And I guess on that note, talk to me about the kind of the importance of the kind of the taper into a race, and why, say in my case, I can't push my training all the way up to UTCT, do like a full month of like training to get myself back in.
Yeah, look, the taper is a super important part of the process. Look, we can, in a perfect world, yes, you can train right up to the day before a race, but chances are that you are going to feel good in that race are highly unlikely. You're not going to be in a state of, like I said, optimal fitness, because you only get better when you rested. So yeah, you can run it, but you're not going to feel good and you're not going to run your best race. However, if we implement a taper, we're giving the body a chance to, like I said, absorb everything, recover fully, and be in a space of optimal performance. And you're going to then have a good race. Again, and I've said this before, when you are training, you are not building anything up. You're breaking down your system. Your muscles are having these little micro tears that are happening in them. You're breaking down. It's only during that recovery and regeneration phase that your body rebuilds and comes back better, faster, stronger.
Yeah.
So that's why I say rest is part of training.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to someone wanting to start out running?
Someone that wants to just start out running, my best advice is just put your shoes on, head outside. First of all, see if you enjoy it. And after you found your love for running, maybe it's a good idea to chat to someone and get some guidance, because like I said, there is a science to the sport. And it's not just a case of run. It's a highly specific way to make sure that you get the best out of your relationship and experience with running. But yeah, my advice is 2 words: just run.
Yeah, amazing. And what advice would you give to someone looking for a coach? How do you go about that process? Again, obviously it's super specific and super personal, but you can't go through 17 coaches on a trial period. So how does someone even begin on that kind of journey?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's important to vet your coach. Ask your coach, what is your experience with the sport? Do you have a qualification? Things like that. Because ultimately, they are responsible for your well-being as an athlete. So I think that's step number 1. Step number 2, have a conversation. Talk to your coach or your potential coach. See if the relationship is going to work. Make sure that you, as the athlete, understand how the coach works, what the coach offers, and what you are going to get in terms of the relationship. And yeah, that's pretty much what I would say. And also just make sure that you're happy with philosophy of the coach. All coaches have different I love Flat Rock's philosophy of do no harm. We put the health of our athletes first and foremost. But I also believe, as Steve Magnus said in his philosophy, and I might get this wrong, but I'll try to get it right. I think he said, most of the time go easy, sometimes go hard, and very seldomly go see God. So that's I believe a great way to put things. A lot of your training should be easy, and very seldomly should you be going to some crazy places. But yeah, I think check the philosophy, vet your coach, make sure the relationship can work. Because like I said to you, A coach is not just your coach. It's going to be your best mate. It's going to be someone you're talking to on a daily basis. So you got to make sure that relationship is going to work.
Amazing. And is there one mantra or saying that you live your life by?
Yes, there is. And I'm going to get this horribly wrong, but I actually said it at my sister's wedding, which I know you were witness to. It's a quote by Travis Rice, who was who still is a snowboarder. And he basically alluded to the fact that our life is now virtual and our friends are now virtual and everything we want to know is just a click away. And he alludes to the fact that if we want to have authenticity in our lives, we have to initiate it. And it's in that initiation that ultimately we find ourselves in the wildest places on earth and pursuing our utmost potential. And I think it's so important to be, conscious in what you are doing. Try to be present in the moment and just enjoy it. So I think that's my mantra. My mantra is all about adventure. You got one life to live, and you don't just want to exist. You want to live. So, just get out there, have fun, and live each day in search of new experiences.
Amazing. That was incredible. Thank you so much.
No, anytime.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers.
Oh, cheers, Dean.
Bye.
Feeling fired up after this incredible episode? Dive deeper into the world of trail running by exploring our other episodes, available wherever you get your podcasts. We're eagerly awaiting your feedback as well, so connect with us on Instagram at TrailChasersPod. Don't hold back. Comment, message, and share your thoughts. Until next week, keep chasing those trails.